Hello guys, and welcome to the Gone To series. In this lesson, we are going to talk about what is Hibernate and why we need Hibernate in our applications. Hibernate by definition is an ORM tool, which means that it is used to map plain Java objects to the tables of a relational database and vice versa. So is the name Object Relational Mapping. This is what definition says all about. Let's see in detail what exactly is Hibernate. Let's say you have a Java application which connects to a relational database, for example MySQL. Let's say you have a student class which contains member variables in it, name, roll number, address, mobile, which represents student information, and you have created a student object out of this class. Now the task is you have to store or persist students information which is there in your student object into the student info table. If you are not using any ORM framework like Hibernate, you would do this task using JDBC, and typically your code would look like this. In this, if you observe, we are passing student object to the function insert student info and then manually mapping the member variables to the columns of the table using an SQL query. And here lies the major problem. Hibernate says, as a Java programmer, why are you writing the SQL queries in the Java application? Just leave that job to me. Just pass the Java object which you want to store or persist, and implicitly I will generate an optimized query and store the data into the table. So if you are using Hibernate, the same code would look like this. Isn't it great? You are relieved from writing the SQL queries in your Java application and have reduced almost 80% of the number of lines of code, which means a better code readability. Similarly, if you want to retrieve records from the student info table in Java application, you first get the result set, and then you frame a Java object, typically a collection object, for example a list, out of the result set like this. Hibernate says this is an overhead in the application. Why you got to write additional code to frame a Java object from result set? Leave that job to me and I will directly give you a collection object or a Java object. So if you are using Hibernate, the same code would look like this. Isn't it great? You do not need to manage the result set at all. Rather than getting result set, you get a Java object directly containing the DB records. Apart from these important features, Hibernate has more to offer, which sometimes make it more than a traditional ORM tool. Whenever we are loading any object from the database, Hibernate first verifies whether that object is available in the cache memory or not. If yes, it will load the object from the cache, otherwise it will load it from the database. So this caching mechanism would reduce the DB hits significantly and would enhance the application's speed. There are different ways in which you can use this caching mechanism in Hibernate. I will talk in detail about this in hands-on session for Hibernate caching mechanism. Using JDBC, you write code to open and close connections. And it's my observation that a lot of Java applications face memory leak problems. And that may be because the developer forgets to keep the closing connection code in the finally block, or maybe because of some other small mistake in the code. If you're using Hibernate, you do not need to even think about it. It will manage the connection implicitly for you. What if you want to support more than one database for your Java application? If you are using JDBC, you would have handwritten queries which may not be optimized or supported by another database vendor. So a lot of modifications and testing effort is needed for supporting more than one database. Hibernate supports a lot of relational databases, almost all. Your application will work with the database of your choice absolutely fine with just a change of a property value in one of the files. What if you're changing the database column name or adding a new column in any of the tables in the database? Let's say there's a table student info and you have renamed the column mobile with phone number. Then using JDBC, you tend to rename this column everywhere in the code wherever you have used this column with a new name. Think of a situation when there are 20 different places for making this modification. Somewhere you might have used this column for retrieval of records and somewhere for update, insertion or deletion purposes. Hibernate says if you are using me, do not bother about such things. For any of such database changes, just make a change at only one place, typically an XML file or an annotation in the Java's model object, and you are done. No further changes required in your Java application. Although we saw Hibernate as an advantage over traditional way of writing code with JDBC. But it's very important to know that it's just an ORM framework which is developed on top of JDBC only, just to hide some of the complexities which lies in JDBC. I would just reiterate what we have learned so far. So using Hibernate, you can tremendously reduce the number of lines of code, almost 80% code reduction, better code readability, no need of writing SQL queries. Hibernate would generate optimized query automatically for the Java application. A real good caching mechanism support for faster data retrieval from the database. Do not need to write code for opening and closing of DB connections. Your application would support almost all relational databases. For any change or modification in the database, a little modification would do the thing in your Java application. In the next lesson, I will talk about the setup needed in Eclipse IDE to use Hibernate.